It is my pleasure to introduce today's expert, Larry Provost. Larry is a program analyst in partnerships and outreach engagement and memorial innovations for the National Cemetery Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs. He is a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq with a long professional history of working in the military and in veterans issues. Skilled in strategic outreach, media relations, Department of Defense relations, intelligence analysis, counterterrorism, lobbying, and politics. Larry holds a master's degree in history, as well as a master's degree in government, and a pending master's focus in legislative affairs from the George Washington University. Now we will watch a short video regarding the VA memorial benefits. All right, Larry, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me today. We're just really honored to be here. We have a slideshow presentation, and then after the slideshow, I'll be more than happy to take questions. Not necessarily going to go through each and every slide, but did want to give you the fullest overview as much as it be possible. And I'm trying to okay, there we go. The history of National Cemetery Administration, we date back essentially to 1862 and President Abraham Lincoln authorizing purchase through the signing into law of national cemeteries, 14 cemeteries in 1862, and that's where the National Cemetery Administration and the National Cemetery System essentially first started. Previously, soldiers were buried where they fell, again, Civil War battlefields and so forth. So we've grown from 14 at that time to 135 plus. And our vision, of course, is to be a model of excellence for burial and memorial benefits for our nation's veterans and their families. For the past 6 years, the National Cemetery Administration has achieved the highest customer satisfaction rating of any entity from the American Consumer Satisfaction Index, and that's 6 years in a row. And we're very excited because since 2014, we had interim secretary for Undersecretary for Memorial Affairs, but we did not have a full-time regular Undersecretary for Memorial Affairs. We now have one, Mr. Randy Reeves, who was appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate recently. We're very, very excited to have him, and he's working closely in conjunction with all the major departments within our agency to help not only maintain, but to take our agency to the next level. And of course, this is our leadership. Many of you may recognize Mr. Walters, our Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Memorial Affairs. He was our interim Undersecretary from 2014 to the time where Mr. Reeves was brought on board. Glenn Powers, he does a great deal of our work as far as the cemetery operations. He's a Deputy Undersecretary for that. The only thing that's really changed on this is Ms. Hanson, our Deputy Undersecretary for Management. She has since retired and so forth, but the rest of the team is still on board. And there's a map of all of our national cemeteries. Those are the ones that are in black. You'll notice some ones that are in green. Those would be of interest because those are our state and tribal cemetery partners through our state veteran cemetery grants program. What essentially that is we give those cemeteries the money for their startup costs and so forth. And what they do with that, they build their cemeteries according to our standards. So we don't count them as amongst the 135 national cemeteries, but we definitely make it known both on our maps and also in our literature that is also an option for our nation's heroes and their spouses. NCA has provided care for over 4.5 million veteran service members and their families and over 3.6 million graves. And we're broken up into 5 districts. And of course, there's another picture of our leadership and so forth. With the cemetery grant program that I just told you about, those were the ones that were in green, if you go back there. Again, we provide 100% of the development costs. We have 109 operational state and tribal cemeteries, 47 states, Guam and Saipan. Many people, they think only continental United States, but we also try to remember our overseas territories as well, and the fact that so many veterans have served from outside of the continental U.S. as well. Our latest and greatest was in Kilmichael, Mississippi, our 107th State Veteran Cemetery. That was last August. You'll see Mr. Reeves in there. At the time, he actually was not our undersecretary. Mr. Walters on the left was representing the agency. So it was kind of ironic, but in a very good way, that Mr. Reeves was brought on board thereafter. Over $766 million in grants awarded since 1978. As a matter of fact, this is the 40th anniversary of the Veteran Cemetery Grants Program this year. So it's very, very important to us. And Mr. Reeves, in his previous position, he worked a lot with state and local veteran groups and entities. So it's something that's just of particular focus to us, not only because of what it is we try to do in reaching, all of the veterans that we can, but there are many veterans that simply just have not had any exposure to the National Cemetery System. So this is another way that we can reach as many veterans as possible. Benefits and eligibility. Okay, what we offer in our cemeteries is the opening and closing of the grave is free. The grave liner is free. The grave liner involves free. Government headstone and marker, and the perpetual forever care and maintenance of the grave is free. This is true in all 135 of our national cemeteries. Those cemeteries that are open and still taking burials. We have 77 open cemeteries out of the 135. Memorial benefits, of course, the upper right headstone. We do inurnment as well. We have government markers available. The medallion program, which we may talk a little bit more about later, but that essentially, along with the Presidential Memorial Certificate, whenever somebody walks by one of our tables at one of our events, I always ask them first and foremost, do you know any veterans? And even if it's somebody who says, well, I never served, and my father or mother, they passed away in '76 and they served. And I say, whoa, don't walk away. We even have something for them. And that's where our Presidential Memorial Certificate program comes in, as well as our medallion program. The medallion program is if a veteran is buried in a private cemetery, and maybe they haven't been exposed to any NCA benefits by virtue of that. They maybe want to be buried in a family plot or something like that, for example. The medallion program annotates their military service by stating the fact that the person buried there is a veteran, but also the veteran's branch of service, whether it be Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, that is annotated as well. So that's just another way that we try to honor the service of our nation's veterans. The great thing about the medallion program, any veteran who has served since April of 1917, the anniversary of America's entry into World War I, is eligible for this. So literally, there is something for every veteran within the last 100 years. National Cemetery Administration, we actually have the lowest threshold of any Department of Veterans Affairs benefit. As long as the veteran does not have a fully dishonorable discharge and meets the other eligibility requirements, that veteran can be buried within our national cemetery. So again, as long as they do not have a fully dishonorable discharge, been convicted of a capital crime, or frankly, any heinous sex crimes or anything like that. So burial flag, that is actually a Department of Defense benefit, but since it's very much a part of what we do, we've included it here in the slide, but that is actually a DoD benefit. The same with military funeral honors as well. One of the common misconceptions we get and questions we get is, well, what about Arlington? Arlington is actually not in our cemetery system. It's run by the Department of the Army. The Department of the Army has two active cemeteries, Arlington National Cemetery and the cemetery at the Old Soldiers Home in Washington, D.C. There are, of course, post cemeteries such as West Point, and other Army posts throughout the country, but two in the National Cemetery System, Arlington and the Old Soldiers Home. The Department of the Interior actually has, I believe, about 13 cemeteries, for example, such as Gettysburg, but only two cemeteries are actually open for burial, and that's Andrew Johnson in Tennessee and Andersonville in Georgia, at the site of the Civil War camp. Okay, next slide. And speaking of eligibility, again, any member of the armed forces who dies on active duty, any veteran who's discharged under qualifying conditions, i.e. other than dishonorable. So theoretically speaking, yes, if you have a bad conduct discharge, you could be buried in one of our cemeteries. National Guard and reservists with 20 years of qualifying service, entitled to retired pay, or it's if you've served a period of active duty where you've received a DD-214. I don't want to say the good thing, but the good thing about it for the National Guard and Reserve is pretty much anyone who served since September 11th has done some form or tour of active duty. So I don't want to say it's moot, but it's become much less of an issue and much less of a question. Spouses, minor children, and certain dependent parents are also eligible. If a child is 23 years old and not receiving, any sort of care from their parents, any sort of legal care, that child does not qualify. The same as any military cemetery. This is our Preneed program. This is actually one of our more exciting things that we have going on. It was launched in December of 2016. One of the best legacies veterans and their spouses can leave their family is a legacy of peace. And that's what the Preneed program is about. It does not obligate the veteran or their spouse to be buried in one of our cemeteries, but what it does, it determines their eligibility beforehand so that when the time of need comes, the veteran or the spouse is not looking in the attic or looking in the basement for the veteran's DD-214 discharge paperwork. That's such a tough time. People are grieving. That's not the time to be looking for that. So we help them establish a legacy of peace by determining their burial eligibility beforehand. I'm 39 years old. I've turned in my Preneed form. I need to get my wife to do hers, but it's one less thing that my family will have to worry about at that time. We talked about legacies, the other legacy being a financial legacy, again, through the benefits that we offer. But with the Preneed form, again, it doesn't, one of the other peaceful legacies that it helps leave is the fact that it also does not obligate you to be buried in one of our cemeteries. It will, you can list a preference if you like, but people's preferences change. You fill one out when you're 30 years old, your preference might change in 20 years. Maybe an event happens, maybe, something happens, you want to be buried elsewhere, or maybe in another national cemetery, things happen. So that's another way we can leave a legacy of peace, in that the veteran can put a preferred cemetery, but again, our program does not obligate them to be buried in our cemetery, which is different than a lot of other programs. It doesn't guarantee burial in a specific cemetery, again, either, because sometimes cemeteries fill up and so forth. Hopefully we all live the next 100 years, but that during that time a cemetery might fill up. So that's the way it is. Over 24,000 approval letters were sent out in FY17. Program at one point it actually reached 10,000 applications in 1 month in 2017. So it's a very, very popular program. One of the common questions that we do get is, okay, Larry, well, say we fill one out, or somebody fills one out when they're 30 years old. A lot can happen in a lifetime. Yes, we do a quick check upon the time of need, just to make sure that that's somebody who should still be buried in one of our national cemeteries. They still meet the eligibility criteria. They haven't committed a capital crime or anything as such. And there is a Preneed form as well. The form is called VA Form 40-10007, and it can be found on the internet. With the Preneed forms, currently they need to be mailed or faxed in. Those pieces of information are on the form itself, but currently, because of privacy issues and that there's personally identifiable information on the form cannot be emailed in. We are working on getting that form online to where it could be submitted online, but at the time being, it needs to be mailed in or faxed in. And again, using a personal example, I mailed mine in as well. It's going to take about, it's going to be over 90 days. I don't have an exact time frame, but it will be over 90 days before getting a response, because we need to bury the veterans that we currently need burying. But there will be a response The response I received, it was very, very nice. Veterans or their spouses, whoever applies. So we do recommend both the veteran and their spouse apply separately. You will receive a very, very nice official looking blue folder with a nice certificate that is used to show the eligibility. And obviously that's something that should be kept in a safe place. But again, it doesn't matter in the sense that we have it in our system, so we could easily look up that veteran's information. One of the other common questions I've gotten about Preneed is, well, this form is great and everything, but I don't know much about my loved one's military service. So that's okay. Put down as much information as it be possible for the Preneed form, and we will do the legwork of getting the veteran's military discharge paperwork if it can be found. So that's one less thing, again, that families have to worry about. And this actually talked about most of what I said before, so we won't need to go over that again. Again, VA stores the information. Eligibility does not enable you, again, to reserve a specific burial space. It's more or less first come, first serve in our cemeteries. The only time where it's there's a grave reserved side by side is if veteran passes away and the veteran's spouse is also a veteran. We make sure of that. Okay. Again, this just lists where to send your application, where to fax it into, and that's also on the form as well, VA Form 40-10007. Open 7 days a week, 362 days a year. We are very busy. This section you can have, but I will skip over it, a good portion of it, just in the interest of time. But as you can see, our workload continuously is going up, and it's a good thing. It's a sacred trust that we have to care for our veterans and their spouses. So going through, list the number of internments, headstones, marker medallions, presidential memorial certificates. These are our busiest, some of our busiest cemeteries. You see Riverside, Florida National, Calverton out on Long Island, Fort Snelling, Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. It's very close to our training center. Fort Logan, Colorado, Dallas, Fort Worth, Fort Sam Houston, Great Lakes, Willamette. And you'll see Arlington National Cemetery down there, which again is a Department of Defense cemetery run by the Army. We're actually a very small agency, 1,853 employees by the end of fiscal year 2017. That out of 3 major VA sub-agencies, we are by far the smallest VA sub-agency. So we have a little over 1,800 employees and 135 plus cemeteries. Over 90% of our employees work outside of DC. One of the things I really like about this agency is that a great portion of the people working here are veterans. Over 3/4 of them, and 1/3 of the people working here are disabled veterans. So these are people that get it, and they understand that we have one time to get this right for a veteran and their family. This may be their only interaction with the government other than paying their taxes or going to the DMV. We have one time to get this right. So that's a sacred trust that we take very, very seriously. Members of the armed forces can be buried, but there are also 2 other uniform services that meet eligibility for burial in our cemeteries. That's the officers of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and also officers of the U.S. Public Health Service. For example, the people you see wearing Surgeon General uniform. Okay. Again, that's our National Training Center, which is out in St. Louis, which is very close to Jefferson Barracks Cemetery. We actually have a cemetery intern training program that runs once a year. The long story short is people that are selected for the program, they come out for a year. It's a TDY move, so they're able to move their families out there while they receive the training for a year. And a lot like the military, once they graduate, we farm them out to the various cemeteries. And it's a very, very good program. Highly recommend it. As a matter of fact, our current Undersecretary, Mr. Reeves, actually went through training at this training center. We have a great many volunteers as well. Again, volunteers donate close to 500,000 hours of service to our national cemeteries in FY17. We need our volunteers. We need our volunteers very much because we are busy and we want to focus so very hard on the families and on the task at hand and so forth. Our volunteers have a lot of interactions with families too. Very often they're the first face in a cemetery lobby when people walk in, for example. So people ask, is there a need for volunteers? Absolutely there is. Okay, again, this talks about the American Customer Satisfaction Index for the 6th consecutive year. That's something we're very proud of, but it's also something we don't want to be complacent on by any stretch, because again, we have one chance to get this right for veterans and their families. This talks about some of our key initiatives. We have new national cemeteries coming up. Land out in Western New York was just recently announced. We've got one opening up in Colorado this year. You'll see on here the red stars. I'm pointing to the one right now with my mouse, New York City, for example. If anybody is from or knows New York City, there's only one cemetery in Manhattan that's still accepting burials. One active cemetery on the island of Manhattan. I actually called once to see how much plots were, and they were running about $20,000. So we realized that burial spaces is a premium within our major cities, and that's where we started our Urban Columbaria initiative, essentially inurnment within major cities for both economical reasons and reasons of practicality. So you see we got New York and the Chicago area and on there and so forth, and that's something we hope to expand in the future because again, very hard to find actual burial space within those cities. Percentage of veterans served, again, every year we want to increase the number of veterans that we serve. Our goal is to provide 95% of veterans with reasonable access within 75 miles of a state, national, or tribal cemetery so that they can have that option. It's our Veterans Legacy Program. This is one of our programs. It really is in many ways. It's going to be the future of our agency because of what the program does. It increasingly connects an American public that has been in many ways separated from its veteran population to its veterans and what they have done. Legacy program will be able to leverage strategic partnerships and modernizing how we memorialize to eventually where people that can actually go in a cemetery, whether it be an open or closed cemetery, and obviously, in a dignified manner, but they'll be able to take out their smartphone, put it over the veteran's headstone, and learn what that veteran did during their time in the military. It's just an absolutely incredible program, and the team that runs it is it's incredible, and it's brand new, and they're already doing great things. But it really is pretty revolutionary in the way people think about cemeteries, that they're not places of death, and we know that in the industry, but they're also places of honor, places of dignity, and places of education. And Legacy is doing partnerships with universities. They've already partnered up with University of Central Florida, San Francisco State, Black Hills State University out in South Dakota. So again, each program being different, but it's leading to local college students sharing their veteran research with the school students on site. So there's something in it, for the veteran and their family. There's something in it for NCA, but there's also something in it for the colleges and universities that we partner up with because they get good quality practical research out of it. So it really is a win-win-win for everybody involved. GPS technology, again, using GPS technology, photo document, headstone marker locations. That is just something that's very, very important to us on many, many levels. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that as well. We talked about presidential memorial certificates. Again, one of the good things, improvements that we have made is we're starting to offer presidential memorial certificates to families on the day of interment. We began this just recently at our 5 largest national cemeteries, and we want to expand that. One of the questions we do get is, can I get a certificate signed by a previous president? Because of the applicable laws, you can only get a certificate signed by the current commander-in-chief. But again, using a personal example, my grandmother, she got one in 1986 when President Reagan was president, and she's been applying and collecting them for every president since. So she's just got an absolute collection of certificates signed by each different commander-in-chief from that time. We do offer a once-a-month cremation-only weekend burial option at select national cemeteries as well. And that is it for the presentation. Again, one of the questions that we may get as well in regards to federal holidays, for example, our cemeteries are never closed for more than 2 days in a row. So if there's a 3-day federal holiday weekend, for example, we just had Washington's birthday, our cemeteries will be open one of those days because, again, our cemeteries cannot be closed more than 2 days in a row. So we do have weekend burials in that sense, but also we've started piloting for weekend burials because, again, we realize, not everybody can take Wednesday off work for a burial service. So we're trying very hard to implement that and initiate that. Also with religious accommodations, whether there's a burial that needs to happen right away. Somebody may have died on a Friday and they need to be buried on a cemetery on a Saturday. We work very hard to make that happen because the way we see it, a veteran is a veteran and they served. So we want to accommodate that as much as it be possible. And with that, I believe I'm finished and I'd be very happy to take questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Larry. So it's now time for Q&A. Please type in your questions into the questions area of your control panel and click send. That will send them over to me. If we're unable to answer all of today's questions, we will provide those answers to you via email. Or if you think of a question after today's webinar is completed, please send us an email at nfda@nfda.org. So the first question came in, and I think this is a really important one. Can two people in a same-sex marriage be buried together?
Yes, they can. We obviously, as a federal agency, we recognize the law, and there was a Supreme Court case that was handed down recently. I don't have the case number, but I remember this from my orientation. So yes, that's something we absolutely that we do recognize. If a spouse of, and not just general to this question, but any question, spouse passes away first, they're entitled to that same benefit, everything except military funeral honors, which of course is a DoD thing, again, unless the spouse also happens to be a veteran. But no, the same benefit applies. It's not an issue in our cemeteries. That's why we're the National Cemetery Administration. We represent the federal government.
Excellent. The next question is, how long does it take for the Preneed eligibility application to process?
The program, one of the good things about the program is it is very, very popular. Like I said, over 10,000 applications 1 month that we had last year. It's going to be over 90 days. And the reason is our sacred trust that we have is to bury our veterans that have passed away immediately. So while, again, this is an important program, it does take a little bit of time because, again, we have to bury our veterans. So with that, it's going to take over 90 days, and recognizing the importance of the program, we are plussing up our scheduling office as well because they also handle these. But I guarantee you will get a response, though, because I tried it myself.
Perfect. A follow-up question kind of to that. I have a veteran who is in a nursing home and receiving a VA check every month. He wants to be buried in a national cemetery, but does not have a DD-214. We've attempted to go through the pre-need process, but have not heard from anyone in 5 months. What can I do to make sure he is eligible to be buried in the national cemetery?
Okay, and the veteran is in a VA nursing home. I would assume that there would have to have been some sort of eligibility established at some point. But what I can do, if somebody can get you that information, Heather, offline, I can actually look into it.
Perfect. Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome.
The next question is, how do you become a volunteer for a national cemetery?
There's several ways you can do it. Number one, you can actually go to that national cemetery and ask what volunteer needs that they have, a local one. Number two, you can get a hold of me. Number three, you can go through what's called VAVS, our VA volunteer service. That's our national set of volunteers that we have through VA. And what they do through VAVS, they actually log the hours and so forth, and people can get certain amounts of recognition for the amount of hours that they put in and so forth. So they do like to track it, just because they want to honor people for what it is they do. So there are those three avenues: the cemetery, getting a hold of myself, or going through VAVS.
Excellent. So the next question is, are the benefits and requirements for the national cemeteries the same as for state veteran cemeteries?
They can, I believe most of them are, but from my understanding, they're not mandated to follow every single one of our eligibility criteria. For example, they may require that a veteran have actually been from that state, or maybe at the time of service that they were in that state. I know with our tribal cemeteries, there can be restrictions. They might say, well, you're only a member of, you should only be a member of a certain tribe to be buried there, and that's understandable as well. So certain states will have some different eligibility requirements, but I will say for the most part, especially with the state cemeteries, other than the residency requirement, pretty much the same for the most part.
Perfect. Next question is, can a husband and wife be guaranteed to be buried side by side?
If both of them are veterans, yes. But what we normally do is we do the stacking, and that is in the interest of space, because we want to give as many veterans as possible the option and the benefit to have what it is that we all currently have.
That makes sense.
And if I can...
Yeah, typically our husband and wife play the same burial plot?
Yes. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, if, for example, a spouse who's not a veteran passes away, the spouse is a veteran, but the veteran spouse passes away, the non-veteran passes away, that spouse can be buried there. And then, heaven forbid, it happens again to another spouse, and spouse number two passes away before, that spouse can also be interned in the same plot as well, and then the veteran. So we have had cases like that.
Wow, I did not know that. Another thing that I learned today that we have a question about is, are we clear, if we understand you correctly, that a person can reapply over and over for presidential certificates from whomever is currently in office?
Correct. Mm-hmm. So you could literally collect signatures from every president from this one on, or if you've started earlier, and and I'm not downplaying the importance of it or the solemnness of it, but I mean, some people just literally, they're so awed by it, and they're so inspired by it that they have gotten certificates from every commander-in-chief since their loved one has passed away, and it really is an honorable and special thing.
That is very good to know, and I had no idea. So, excellent question. The next question is, prior to the death of a veteran, can a headstone medallion be applied for?
I believe, I want to check the form just to be sure, but I'm very sure that would actually be after, at the time of need. I was just looking at the form beforehand. So.
No problem. We can follow up on that one via email.
Yeah, that's because upon receipt of claim for fixing to existing privately purchased headstone or marker at the gravesite of an eligible deceased veteran. So yes, it's definitely after the time of death.
Got it. So the medallion would be an at-need application.
Yes.
Thank you.
Though, though one thing I would say, our pre-need application can serve in effect as almost a pre-need application for a government headstone, because the government headstone is the one benefit we also give in private cemeteries that we give in our cemeteries. So if you fill out a pre-need application, again, let's just use me an example. Say I put, I don't have to put a preferred cemetery, but if I do, I can put Quantico National Cemetery on there. Well, things might change. I might decide to be buried elsewhere, or my spouse might have me buried elsewhere. If that happens, my spouse be like, well, you know, I want him buried in the family plot, but it sure would be nice to at least get something out of this. Well, the pre-need application can actually serve in effect as the initial determining application for the headstone. Now they actually have to fill out the actual application at the time of need, but in effect, it does serve as a determination for the eligibility for the headstone as well. But just let me be clear, you do have to fill out the application for a government headstone or marker after the time of need.
And great to know. So once they've filled out the eligibility pre-need application and received that letter, that's transferable to any national cemetery. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome. We have a question regarding the Veterans Legacy Program. With the new program allowing people to learn about the veteran service, how can I become a part of that here in my state?
You can contact the Veterans Legacy Program, and there's a flyer that I can actually have sent out that'll have their contact information, but essentially it's Veterans Legacy Program at va.gov. And they are on Facebook and Twitter as well. But again, Veterans Legacy Program at va.gov.
Excellent, thank you. In terms of the services that are conducted at Arlington National Cemetery, are those also applied for through St. Louis?
No, they're not, because with Arlington being an Army cemetery, they do their own thing, and it's run specifically through Arlington.
That makes sense. If a veteran is not placed in a national cemetery or in any cemetery, for example, if their cremated remains are going to be scattered, is that veteran still eligible for a niche plaque at the National Cemetery?
I don't believe so, but I will get a final answer on that. Because, yeah, again, that's sort of, that's a space that would go to another veteran. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So we'll follow up on that via email.
Yes.
In terms of the Veterans Legacy Program, again, is that program already being implemented? And if so, where on the development scale does that have, has that been enacted at our national cemeteries?
Well, it's brand new. So, down at one of our Florida cemeteries, it takes a lot to build up a program of this magnitude. So I would like to say in the long-term stages that it's really in its infancy, but even in the year or so that it's been around, to have made partnerships with at least 3 schools, if not 4 or 5 now, it really has taken off, and the trajectory is just going to go up. We're hoping that more money will be budgeted for it next year. We have that in the proposal and so forth. there's a great deal more money budgeted for it, and hopefully that'll be signed into law. But it is such an important program because, the one thing that people agree on is the need to honor our veterans and to be able to connect a public that's increasingly disconnected from its veteran population. It's not a feel-good program. It serves a public and a historical trust. So
awesome.
it really
Thank
is
you, Larry.
in its infancy.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's exciting. And anytime we can bring any more education into cemeteries, I think that's really wise.
Yeah, and if you look at it from an industry perspective too, you don't, it's not something you want people to be afraid of, but actually, as much as it be possible to embrace and to learn. The natures of cemetery in so many ways is changing. So, and this is part of that.
Excellent. So, Larry, in terms of eligibility for veterans, if a veteran were to die from a non-service connected death, would they still be eligible for burial and plot allowance funds, even if they're not receiving any VA benefits?
Okay. Let me look on here. And the reason why, the burial allowance, believe it or not, is actually not a National Cemetery Administration benefit. It's through another agency within VA, the Veterans Benefits Administration, the people who do disability claims and so forth. But what I see here is that, and you said not as a result of a service-connected disability, no VA compensation,
Correct.
and died in a private hospital?
Correct.
Okay. No, because it appears at least one of the following on the form, and if you don't have that, we'll make sure you get it. But on the burial and plot interment allowance form, it says one of the following conditions must be met. The veteran died as a result of service-connected disability, or the veteran was receiving VA pension or compensation at the time of death, or the veteran was entitled to receive VA pension or compensation, but instead decided to receive full military retirement or disability pay, or a veteran died while hospitalized by VA or while receiving care under VA contract at a non-VA facility, or veteran died while traveling under proper authorization and at VA expense to or from a specified place for the purpose of examination, treatment, or care, or veteran had an original or reopened claim for VA compensation or pension pending at the time of death and would have been entitled to benefits from a date prior to the time of death, or veteran died on or after October 9th, 1996 while a patient at a VA-approved state nursing home. So based on the language of that particular veteran, based on the scenario you gave me, would not appear to be eligible. Got it. Thank you, Larry. You're welcome. But I do always recommend people try, though. You always always try. Because laws can change.
In the event that a family is unable to locate the DD-214, would their application process to the Preneed eligibility system allow for them to serve the same purpose as if they had a DD-214 for that burial?
That's a very good question. One of the other great things about the Preneed program that I didn't mention, if you do not have the veteran's discharge paperwork, we will do everything we can to locate it. So if you can't send it in with the Preneed form, we will do our very best to call the National Personnel Records Center or whoever the appropriate entity is and get that information so that the eligibility determination can be made. So is a DD-214 necessary for the Preneed application? No. Is it preferred? Definitely, because then it can speed up the application.
Awesome. Yeah, that totally makes sense. This is a great question, and I thought about this, and I'm really glad that someone asked. If a veteran is going to have their cremated remains scattered on private property, are they still entitled to a bronze marker?
I don't believe so, because that's a scattering. But I want to, again, along with the niche plaque question, I want to check. Yes, because I'm pretty sure that it would not be, because that's actually still government property, and so that would need to go to a cemetery resting place. But I will find out the final answer.
That makes sense. And I imagine that a lot of, as we move forward in the future, that a lot of families will be choosing to do that sort of thing. Do you know if there's any plans for national cemeteries to include scattering gardens or that sort of maybe ossuary aspect?
I know green burials, is an option that we're. If anything, it's definitely going to. There's going to be more of in the future. I believe it's been launched on an experimental basis. I can't say that for certain, but I know it's definitely the direction that we're going.
Excellent. And could you tell us a little bit more about the urban columbaria?
Absolutely. Using the New York City example, we were very lucky in the sense that we were able to get some additional land next to the St. Albans Hospital and so forth, which is a Department of Veterans Affairs facility. Now, some of the land was, if not most of the land, was already ours and so forth. But some people said, well, will people how would they feel, having a columbarium and interments next to a hospital or whatever location in a city. City people get it. City people realize that this is something that has to be done. That's just, burial within the city is either way too expensive, not available, or traveling far away outside of the city to have a loved one buried is not necessarily economically feasible. So it really hasn't been an issue, and it's a program that we hope to expand more and more in the future, dependent upon funding and so forth. But there is a need for it, and we recognize it.
It's exciting. Thank you. And this is an amalgamation of several different questions.
Okay.
If a DD 214 is not available, should we be able to call St. Louis for help with that, or is there a different process?
As far as at the time of need or for pre-need, I guess I can go, answer both. For pre-need, 214, not needed. There is, if I can look it up online, there is an emergency number at the National Personnel Records Center. I believe it's for funeral directors, and I'm just looking it up here real quick. There is an emergency number, and I just want to make sure. Yes, okay. Okay. Yeah, there's two important numbers for emergency requests and deadlines, such as natural disasters and obviously funerals and so forth. The customer service fax number is 314-801-0764, and the customer service staff number is 314-801-0800, and that's if you require same-day service. This is on the National Archives website. I Googled emergency DD214 request. So, and it was on the National Archives website. It does say, due to the large number of calls we receive at this number, this is the telephone number, hold times are often long. However, once you reach a technician, he or she will be happy to assist you with emergency service. And this is from the National Personnel Records Center. We actually do not keep those records.
Great to know. Thank you so much, Larry. And I've also put in those phone numbers and fax number in the chat box as well.
Okay. If I may, also, the number to our scheduling office, which should, for emergency DD214, I mean, this shouldn't be the first number you call, but The number to our scheduling office is 1-800-535-1117.
Perfect. I'll put that in the chat box as well. Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome.
This is a great question. How do you determine the percentage of how many veterans are served at a national cemetery location?
Determine the percentage? I'm sorry I just want to make sure I understand the question. Like how many veterans are buried there, or I think
how many veterans are in the area of that particular cemetery?
The VA keeps track of that data. I'm not sure exactly how, but VA does keep track of that data, where veterans live and so forth. So that's where that information comes from. But I'm not exactly sure of every single method of how it's achieved. But that is very important in regards to our central placement within the radius and so forth.
And this is a question I don't know if you'll be able to answer, but if a person is in a public service position like a police department or fire department, would they be able to do the same flag application as a VA burial flag?
Yeah, well, we don't handle the burial flags. That's Department of Defense. So I got to be honest, I really don't know. But if, like Department of Defense, I mean, they would handle a burial flag request for any veteran. Many veterans have served in police and fire and so forth. But if it's a police officer or firefighter, who happens to pass away and they're still currently serving, I mean, I really could imagine their department would have an idea of how to get that. But it's not something we don't handle the flags here. I'll give you an example just from personal experience. I was doing a funeral once at one of our cemeteries, and doing a funeral in the sense I'm part of the funeral honors team in the military, and part of my job is folding the flag. And I could see easily that the flag on this casket was way too small, and so the long and the short is we ended up having a very, very poor fold, and we ended up thankfully bringing one of our own flags in the vehicle. We always try to keep an extra in the vehicle, and we refolded for the family, and we gave it to that family. But the funeral director was insistent, no, this is the proper flag. And I said, sir, we've done over 100 funerals, and we folded all these flags, and this flag is way too small. So yeah, that's something that's handled through DoD.
Got it. Thanks, Larry. Could you please clarify what parts of a committal or a graveside service honors that a person who passed away but was part of the National Guard may be allowed to have?
Again, that's something that is up to DoD, but based on personal experience, if somebody from the National Guard is eligible to be buried in one of the national cemeteries, at the very least, there's going to be taps in the folding and presenting of the flag to the family, but that's determined by DoD and not by NCA. There are a few veterans, if I can put in a disclaimer on that, there are a few veterans, for example, maybe they have an other than honorable discharge, for example, or even a bad conduct discharge. They're not going to be eligible for military funeral honors, but that being a DoD benefit, but they will still be eligible for burial in our cemeteries. I personally have yet to see that happen, but I mean, it has happened.
That makes sense. Okay, so I know we're closing in on time. The last question that came in, and I'll paraphrase. In my work, I provide a lot of seminars for people to educate them, sometimes about, veterans' burials. I find that most veterans and many social workers do not know about eligibility or are often misinformed. Does the VA offer any sort of certification or training for funeral directors to have in order to make sure that they're providing the most accurate and updated information?
Well, I would say in a sense, yes, in terms of what we're doing today, and it's something that we hope to do more and more. We also do a tremendous amount of outreach. It doesn't serve as formal training, but we do a tremendous amount of outreach at national and state level Veteran Service Organization conferences, whether it be at the American Legion, VFW, Disabled American Veterans. We also have an increasing social media presence, whether it be the post 9/11 veterans organizations or private entities as well. And we do exhibit, for example, at NFDA. We do try to get information within particular industry publications and so forth. So we do try to get the word out, but many people, frankly, do not want to talk about these sorts of issues, but that makes it all the more important as to why we have to go out there and do what it is that we do. And that's why I frame it in terms of, we're not here to talk about death. We're here to talk about what kind of legacy you can leave. You can help leave your family a financial legacy. You can help them leave a legacy of peace, and you can help them leave a legacy of eternal and dignified memorialization through our cemeteries and also through our legacy program.
Excellent. And I will be sending out to everyone in their email follow-up the information for where you can visit the burial benefits and kind of funeral directors resources online. So that is all the time we have today. I want to thank you again, Larry, for sharing your expertise on how we can best serve our veterans with our national audience.